Hey there, welcome to episode 45 of the FFS Talk audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at about 10:10 a.m. on October 3rd. That's a Thursday, 2024, here in Vegas. The temperatures are still too high. It's too darn hot, but welcome to the desert. Today, now that the debate season appears to be over at least for our national election cycle, there are some thoughts on debates and what could be better, perhaps. And as we know, the FFS Talk audio program is about what works, what doesn't, and what we can do about it. I think there would be it would be difficult to find people arguing that the current debate scheme that is used certainly for national elections could be better, could be more useful, could provide better results than fodder for more political advertising, punditry, finger pointing, accusations, and so on. So it's kind of a mess, but it's what we know, it's what we have, it's what many dollars are spent on. Even the debate prep is now a focus area. Like, who's playing the other side? What are they doing? You know, like, Are they going to be nervous? Yeah. The list goes on. So yeah, that's what we'll talk about today. Not necessarily in a political manner, but functional, if that's possible. So we're not talking about which candidate did better or worse. I will actually focus more on some history, some recent history. And we'll see what happens. If you've never heard the FFS Talk audio program before, the idea is if there is a guest, so much the better, to discuss something, some process, some notion, some infrastructure, some anything that might not be working. So we discuss what is working, what is not working, and what we could do about it, how we could fix, who we could get to fix, and so on. Often understanding the problem is the first step in finding a solution. Understanding the parts that are not the problem can help. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you have the episode description, which contains the show notes. There's a brief summary, which I will read. There are some links for today's episode. There are several, starting off with the shameless self-promotion, the usual first two. So we better get on with it, because I'm going to predict this will be a long one. The summary of today's episode: political debates, you gotta love them. Or do you? Are political debates, and we know which ones in particular, worth the trouble, or should we as an electorate come up with something else? Should not those doing the hiring determine how we conduct the interviews? A little typo in there. Fixing it live. I read through the typo. So yeah, basically, if our elected political officials work for us, we the people and all that, shouldn't we have a say, or shouldn't we be more involved proactively in who we're hiring and how we're selecting, how we're interviewing, how we are making these very important decisions? There's the question. So the links for today's episode, again, in the episode description where you found this audio program. And by the way, I don't necessarily expect that you will follow these links and read and watch or whatever's appropriate. But I do hope you'll at least take a look at the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo page. If you heard the motorcycle, the production by street, still in effect. Buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo and Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. I use these for getting the word out about my various projects and so on. You do not have to spend any money. You can if you want. Any funds that arrive through either of these portals are used to purchase coffee or coffee accessories, which is what powers my projects. In the meantime, links to my complete catalog of audio program production. I do produce 4 different shows each week. Those are there. And hopefully more interesting stuff coming. I keep saying this every week, but I'm always super busy not publishing or releasing or launching the drudgery, the other 95%. So check those out. I do use them, as so many open source developers do, for various projects, as a sort of a known quantity. If you see a Buy Me a Coffee button on a website, or if you see a Ko-fi.com website button. Similarly, they're kind of familiar. They're a known quantity. So it's one of the reasons I started using them. It's not a website or an infrastructure that I need to deal with or maintain, the coding side. So I should add more stuff, which means I should launch more stuff, which I just mentioned. So now onto the topical links. I've put a link to the Wikipedia page on debate. It's worth a glance. A couple of interesting notions, some comparisons, a couple different formats and stuff. The notion of debate, I believe, has changed. The perception of debate has changed, especially in recent election cycles. So it's always interesting to have a little bit of perspective. What is a Lincoln-Douglas debate? What did happen in 1960? I believe it was September 26 for the Kennedy-Nixon or Nixon-Kennedy first ever televised debate. And coincidentally, I have a link to, there's a website hosted at purdue.edu, the history of debate, the Kennedy-Nixon, it's a scholarly article. And give it a look, see what you think. That was a turning point for the notion of having head-to-head question and answer televised for all the world to see at the same time. Of course, back in 1960, there were no TiVos, there was no YouTube. You were pretty much watching it as it happened, and people would tune in. All of the debates, are you curious? Well, if you go to the presidency.ucsb.edu link, then we have all the debates for the president, vice president, both primary and general election debates. And interesting, if you are curious, there are transcripts of the debates. Some of the debates have a little bit more information at the top about the participants, which you can infer, the moderators or panelists for questions, the format you kind of have to guess at. I wish they had a little bit more structure to the data they're presenting, because I was actually looking for a particular debate and I could not remember even who was in it, much less, so you have to skim through it. But I did find it. I'll get to that in a moment. So debate history, there's a Wikipedia on the history of the presidential debates. Again, more, individual debates and so on. So you can find links to things, articles and mentions and conversations about the debates, individual debates and so on. The UCSB site, so all of the debates, as I've described it, is actually kind of one of those things you can bookmark if people bookmark things anymore. The debate history on Wikipedia is a little bit more generic, so it's it's a Wikipedia article. Both take a glance, but the the debate I was looking for was actually the 2000 Bush-Gore debate number two. It was a seated town hall. They were sitting at a table, as one might be seated in a coffee shop or maybe at dinner over a meal, with a moderator. What's his name? Neil Lehrer. Was it Neil? Neil Lehrer? Now I gotta look. Of course they don't say his name. Oh yeah, Jim Lehrer. Jim. It's Neil. Jim Lehrer. I remember seeing this debate, so that's why I was like, I remember it, but I can't picture who was in it. It was interesting to me because they were sitting at a table, and it was a town hall question submissions, so they could sit there, and it was almost like a conversation. George W. Bush preferred this scheme, not scheme really, but more of a format, I guess. Sitting at a table is a little bit more relaxed. They're a little bit closer to each other. They can look directly at each other. There can be a two-shot more easily, so you see one image rather than the boxes of talking head and responsive head that we keep seeing now. That's an interesting format, which I will talk about more towards the end of today's episode. Yeah, so 2000 Bush. Now, you should, if you are curious, you should check out that debate with Kennedy and Nixon. Not every debate is standing at a podium. Jeopardy rundown. Why is that on here? Well, I'll tell you about that later. So there's a Wikipedia page on Jeopardy, the game show. And there's a Jeopardy board template website that will enable you to build a PowerPoint presentation that looks like a Jeopardy game board, I guess you could say. We'll get to that later. Now on with the show. So do we need talk debates? Unfortunately, yes. Do we need to talk debates? To talk debates. Do we need to talk debates? Unfortunately, yes. Okay, debate season is apparently over as the national election fast approaches, but we still need to talk about debates. That's what I should have said. Do we need to talk about debates? Crazy. I actually wrote that yesterday. And while your local candidates for public office may have a debate on deck, a debate or two maybe, depending on where you are, our presidential candidates and their vice presidential running mates are done. So were they useful? And by the way, the presidential, depending on how heated the general election is becoming, or it already is, the debates between senators, Congress people, the candidates in your local, mayoral elections, city council, and so on, these may completely, they just get lost. So it's not totally clear that they would get the attention that they deserve or require, really, to make them useful. But debates now on the national stage for general election, especially between the presidents, presidential candidates, the vice presidents, of course, have a debate or two this year. One. They are sound bites, performance analysis, definitely us versus them evaluation, like who won? Both sides won, of course. The other side lost. They got in the zingers. They got fact-checked when they shouldn't have been, or they didn't get fact-checked when they should have been. Nothing unexpected anymore. There is no, well, you can't really say that, but the debates of today are pretty much performative, and they're pretty much going to result in just more finger-pointing, accusations, angst, maybe some vitriol. And occasionally something bizarre will happen or something unexpected. I think the first debate between former President Trump and President Biden fits that bill. I have my own theory, not conspiracy, well, maybe conspiracy, as to why the early presidential debate took place. It was I believe the earliest in history, June. And yeah, why was it so early? So that led to a series of events that changed the top of the ticket for the Democratic Party, the sitting vice president now running for the office of president. So the second debate was sort of the first debate, and probably somewhat more consequential, just given the length of the runway for the candidate to campaign. So this was some exposure head-to-head. Fun fact, it turns out that the president and the vice president had not had an opportunity to meet with the former president during the inauguration or the transfer of power in 2021, because the former president, President Trump, did not attend. So as was pointed out, it was the first opportunity sitting vice president and presidential candidate Kamala Harris had an opportunity to meet the former president in person. So that was curious, but probably valuable to see how that dynamic worked. So there are some aspects of an in-person debate on television that everyone can see, ideally unedited. So if you can see it in its original form, there is some interpersonal dynamics that are visible and so on. So that's what they learned in the Nixon-Kennedy debate. When everyone can see, there may be more to see than they are ready for. We seem surprised and maybe even disappointed when a debate is not vitriolic at this point. Witness the vice presidential debate of 2024, the one and only. It was a completely different playing of the game, because neither candidate, these would be J.D. Vance for the Republican Party and Tim Walz. Some people pronounce it Waltz, and there is I want to say German, but there's a European pronunciation of his name that does include a sort of a TZ. So I believe he pronounces it Tim Walz, like a plural of a wall, which is, of course, everybody's favorite topic lately. So they did not take so many stabs at each other personally. It was much more about the top of the ticket, which some would say is the way it's supposed to be. You're really not running for president, so you should be playing a supportive role, you should be attacking the other person's presidential candidate. And then so you're basically defending. It's arguable. At some level, you're supposed to know who these candidates are and whether they would be a suitable replacement in the circumstance where they would have to fulfill their primary duty, which is to step into the role of president if called upon to do so. So that would be useful, but I think because debates are so performative, we get what we get. So we have these debates. Everybody wrangles over them. They are themselves headline news whenever there's mention of debate and who's in and who's out, who's not going to show up, who's going to show up either way. Hey, we had a debate. She didn't show up. Hey, I'm going to show up either way. It becomes more finger pointing. That's the name of the game. It's almost like, is it WWE, World Wrestling? It's the show. It's part of the show to rile up the fans. So what works? What do we have? Debates show our candidates on their own, so they're usually standing by themselves, on what we hope is a level playing field, truck going by, production by street, engaging each other with a set of rules and the lights on. We hope there is no funny business, so no edits, no shenanigans, no chicanery. So the lights are on, we can see everything. We hope. In the case of a primary election phase, there are often many candidates on stage, which can be problematic, but these debates in particular tend to get a ranking set up. Usually after the very first round, if there's like a dozen people vying to get into the top tier, you can pick those out. Usually one round in, one round of debates. And if there's an overflow, unfortunately, just being in the second, the overflow round is probably not a good thing. So they try things like ordering by, which pool you'll be in, the primary or secondary, the main or the overflow, or whatever they call them, right? The second tier, you have to be careful with the words, the labels, but they kind of go by polling numbers and so on. But polling, as we know, is not totally ideal. It's party based, so it's whatever they want. There's usually a sponsor. Maybe they have a say in it. It is what it is. And some candidates choose not to show up. But it is a performance. And, depending on how you perform at that early stage, you may not choose to stick around. It will become pretty clear where the rankings are after that first outing. Some people will come off really well. Some people will not come off really well. And it's tricky to attack members of your own party. It's like stealing the ball from your own team, right? Tackling your own runner. So, but it's performative, and the losers get the message pretty quickly. More to talk about. With YouTube and other such platforms and some excerpt edits, normal people need not sit through the debates 90 minutes or who knows how long with legions of pundits and experts and profoundly partisan hacks declaring every possibility of outcomes, highlights, winners, and losers on their YouTube channel, on their Twitch channel, maybe live chatting, maybe reacting to the debate during watch parties and so on. So the notion that I have to watch the debate, it's part of my responsibility as a voter, and I'm going to set aside some time at the dinner hour and watch and maybe discuss it with the family and so on. These are no longer necessary. And I would venture, even though the ratings for the debate between Trump and Harris were pretty good, many people will be watching excerpt and time shifted, and they'll look for the commentary, whether to watch the whole thing. And I will admit, I'm one of those people. I don't want to watch 90 minutes of drama. Now, what I did do is go back and watch the Trump-Harris debate after. So I was kind of got the spoilers up front. I did not watch the entire Trump-Biden debate. That just seemed to be ridiculous. Once we knew where it went, we don't really need to watch the whole journey. Some people probably enjoyed the whole thing, but yeah, there's just more to talk about and more ways to talk about it and more ways to make a debate performance linger for longer periods of time. So what really shakes out? Obviously, a debate can matter. Sweaty lip, checking the watch, a witty retort, blank stare. Little details are often not little at all. If anybody remembers I can't remember if it was the third debate. It was Bush Gore, but they were not seated at a table. It was a town hall style, and they were free to walk around the stage, which I actually think is one of the more interesting formats. Gore walked up behind Bush, and Bush kind of turns and looks like, "Hi." In fact, I think he said something just like that. And it was just one of those moments, very, very kind of funny, but also you could tell it was completely improvised. His reaction was, it was what it was. There was another similar scenario with Hillary Clinton, when they were in a similar scenario, a town hall style, moving about on a stage, free to move in all dimensions. There was this sense that Trump was stalking her, and it kind of looked strange on the camera. It probably didn't look that way in person. They say, and by the way, so these debate formats are now for television and a television audience. I'm going to suggest that even in person, they're really produced for TV first. So you happen to be able to see it in a live audience, but it's completely, totally performative for the viewing audience. And that's okay. I mean, the nature of the game is to speak to the electorate, not the 100 or 500 people in the studio, or whatever the number is. They say to turn down the sound and watch the mime, watch the body language and the interactions, how they do on the split screen with the boxes. Do they have a blank look? Do they shake their head and sigh, especially if the mics are on, as Gore was famously dinged for, I guess. He got a lot of negative press for that. Are they responsive? Do they look interested? Or do they look like they're actually paying attention? Or are they looking away? There's all kinds of stuff it's body language. But try listening to an audio only version of the debates. And I got this when I was looking through the what was it, Purdue? The collection of all debates that are transcripts in the links. They try reading a presidential debate transcript. If you're looking for a quote or a phrase or some sort of specifics, sure, but you absolutely lose any notion of what the debate really was, because they are performative. If people were debating over an email thread, that's what the transcript is, right? So you, as they so often say in today's world, the emotion, the connotation, the feeling, the meaning, all these aspects of communication are absolutely filtered out and lost. Production by Street are lost when you do your when you filter out the interpersonal communication, and you're left with just the words. So, and I cannot remember the ratio. Is it like 7-20-70 or whatever it is? Like almost all communication is nonverbal, and the smallest part is the words chosen. So the transcript gives you the smallest amount of information in an interchange or interaction or discussion between people. The nonverbal provides the most information, but the middle is the word selection. So the vocabulary, the way ideas are expressed. So really you need all three. And a televised debate, especially if they're standing at a podium, will attempt to provide all of that. However, because it is performative, you're seeing a performance. You're not seeing real interaction. Arguable. That's my take, and I don't think I'm alone. The value of a debate is multiplied for days, literally, with the sound bites and the commentary, who won and why, and so on. So another news cycle can be fueled by the outcome of the debate. There was always a joke when I was younger that the president would make an address, would address the nation, and then 3 reporters would follow to tell you exactly what the president just said. And of course, there's usually the response from the other party, because we always assume there's 2 parties, never other parties. Arguably, the winning candidate is making the most of the upcycle. The other candidate or candidates, depending on where you are, primary, there's a lot of others that did not win, are getting out there spinning at rallies and in interviews. They're saying, "Oh, well, this is what I meant. This was unfair." All the usual stuff. The score isn't quite so interesting as individual plays, if we can throw in a sports analogy. And politics is sports at this point, with team loyalties regardless of reality. Doesn't matter who the candidate is. I'm a Republican. Same goes with the Democrats. There's no way you're going to find a Kennedy voting for a Republican, right? That's been an issue for decades since Arnold Schwarzenegger entered the family briefly. Zingers, pummeling, calling out lies, callbacks to previous statements, all of which can and will cause an audible shock and awe response from a live audience if there is one, which is why now there's a move away from live audiences so they don't distract, so they don't give, essentially what you're doing is getting a biased, immediate response or injection of bias for the viewing audience. So if they hear the clapping and cheers or laughing or whatever, that's a cue for how to respond rather than just allowing the viewing audience without that additional signaling and not to mention the distraction for the actual candidates. So if you keep the room quiet without the opportunity for people to respond like that and provide these signals, then you get what I would say could be a flatter response from your viewing public. So this is what matters, and it matters as much for the next election cycle so that we can look back at the zinger one more time to reinforce that debates really are the sweet science. So boxing otherwise. So it matters because the things that matter are the zingers and the performance. It's purely the performance, whether they were able to almost literally box their opponent into like an unwinnable can't answer. And if you did catch the Vance Walz debate, you know that at the very end, despite almost a rope-a-dope, I believe the universal opinion is that Tim Walz said, I'm not a good debater, and he came through on that. J.D. Vance was and continues to be representative of the polished Yale debater, experienced champion, I think has been thrown around, attorney. So, polished image versus the state governor who's your friend and your buddy and all that. So they kind of preloaded expectations. But all through the debate, I think the joke is so for 89 minutes or for 9.5 rounds or however you want to break down the debate, it was mediocre until the final the final blow, if you will, from Tim Walz on J.D. Vance. And I'll let you find that debate and watch it yourself. But at the end of the day, it's that zinger. It's that strategic, after many rounds of boxing and, not really, but theoretically tired, and you're coming to the end, you're waiting for that final bell, and then there's that one last shot to the jaw, and the recovery was not there for some. So it's interesting the way the debates are now couched, but they're not. And there was some commentary. There was actually a discussion about policy. So if you can speak about policy in real and useful ways, and this used to happen with famously Bill Clinton debating what's his name, George H.W. Bush, Bush 41, if you like. They were debating, and it was something about the economy, I think. And sometime later, either right after or soon after, George H.W. Bush said something like, well, that's why he's doing so well in the election, because Clinton was also a governor. He was from Arkansas governor, right? So he's running against a sitting president and arguably more experienced, more worldly, and so on. But he was able to get his point across. So it wasn't a zinger. It was actually a meaningful message and I want to say it was a town hall. So it was meaningful in the context of offering that response. Nowadays, we're focused more on the zingers and the sweet science. Can you land a punch that the other can't respond to or recover from? Performance. So the parts that get worse. Debates are fine, except for a couple of things. These are the format. One person behind a podium is not how the world works. There should be notes, resources, references, maybe access to their staff and advisors, the way the job will be performed. If we want policy and insight, the candidate is not an island, right? They will be influenced. They will have thoughts. They will have references to check. They will have history to go over. The questions, these are usually topical and timely, but they are a central weakness when it comes to spin later. There's bound to be bias in the way they're asked, and whatever the rebut scheme is in the rules, it is always a weakness for every individual question. So every question that is posed, especially if it's by reporters, that's my own editorial addition. You might be a wonderful reporter. You might have been doing this for decades. You might be a wonderful television personality. I don't know that a subject matter expert couldn't do a far better job at nuance and construction of meaningful in-context questions. If questions are directed to a particular candidate, that also gets a little tricky. Then it's really just a two-person oppositional press conference, really, when you think about it. Are any of the candidates bugged? No, seriously, listening devices, hidden communicators, are they cheating in some way? Was there a note card? Was there a battery pack? Was there a headset? Was there an earring acting as a Bluetooth device? Come on. Those are tricky because is it worthwhile to be caught cheating? No, probably not. Well, I think for some candidates they could do whatever they want, but and then the fact checking, possibly the most controversial, especially lately. Of course, this is a big one. With one side lately more concerned about this explicitly than the other, perhaps. The audience will not fact check. That's mostly true. Like, do you ever go ahead and check, like, was that really 49 million or was it actually 49,000? So we kind of rely on the professional media, the actual reporters, the panel, or the moderators, whatever the structure is. The audience doesn't fact check, so they do or they do not, or sometimes they agree to not, but they do anyway a little bit or something. Who knows? By and large, no matter how that notion is presented about fact checking, so like any referee in any battle sport, sports where there's pummeling and especially full contact, they can spoil momentum. They can appear to aid one side over the other, and they may count more slowly. They may let a couple things slide. And that's always fodder for spin later and accusations and finger pointing and so on. So they might even get it wrong, which is total chaos. So that's a tricky one. And I had an error in my notes here. Grammatical. How that notion is presented. Anyway, I'll try to fix it later. Since televised debates are almost completely performative, as I've said a few times, and since watch statistics are a curious thing now, that many of us watch such things live or later time shifted or in excerpts or in a reaction video on Twitch or YouTube and so on. So who knows? They have first viewer. I have an email message right now that the VP debate attracted 43.2 million viewers. So presumably that's first night, and time shifted by 24 hours is usually a legacy method of counting viewership, because you figure, well, some people watched it after work or after they got home or the next morning, or so you give a 24-hour window for time shift. But now things can be time shifted for years. Who knows? But you can have people watching just the excerpts, and who knows how that's counted. And it could be as consequential, not always in the intended direction. So, yeah, what does it mean to have viewership on TV or wherever they're taking these measurements when there are so many other places to take these measurements? Some version of the debate or parts of it are seen by some in some context with some commentary and with some interpretation, which means there may well be different versions of the same debate floating around, and that's almost a guarantee at this point. Immediately after the vice presidential debate between Vance and Walz, instantly, YouTube headlines and thumbnails about who clobbered the other, who clearly won, and didn't matter that both were equally represented. So you get punditry and political hacks and those looking for clicks. So they're just as much to blame in all this. That got to monetize. So I'm going to feed my audience with the best of news. Increasingly in recent cycles, the lingering impact of a particular debate is often centered on favoritism, possible cheating, the moderators or question panel members, and then a quick change of subjects to the next thing. So the debate is like, yeah, we had the debate, they cheated, they treated me badly, the questions were bad, the other candidate was not following the rules, they were talking over me, they were wandering around the stage, intimidating. There's all sorts of I don't want to say nitpicking, but it is sort of focusing on, which color was the grass on the field kind of thing. The persistent value of a debate in situ is something that polls can show not so clearly, but it may not be their value. That may not be that their value drops off in the age of 24-hour news and nonstop partisan internet activities that comes through. So these things probably happen. You get all sorts of related commentary and reporting and so on. So the value of the actual debate drops off in the sea of commentary and sort of secondary and tertiary associations and punditry and so on. And then the subject changes to something else. So the debate from last night or 2 nights ago is a distant memory barely worth discussing 5 nights ago, right? Like, oh, we're already on to total chaos somewhere else. So that's what we have. Some things work. You get to see the candidates. You get to see them interacting in some way. This is more useful as an elimination round, which I'm sure I will mention again. For the primaries, if there's a large field of potential candidates, if you got a dozen or 15 people that are thinking about running, and they've done their paperwork, they're in the primary process, and they're going to get on the stage with a dozen or so, competitors, opponents. They're all kind of on the same side, but not really, and there's some sniping and whatnot, but you get to see them. You get to see them all in one place. You get to see their body language and all that other stuff, and it is what it is. On the other hand, a lot of things about debates are becoming less and less valuable for making informed decisions and more valuable for making emotional decisions when it comes to which candidate you would like to have fill the job. You're the hiring manager. Let's pick somebody. Oh, you thought they were funny. That might be useful, but is it? So I have some ideas for change. So we did the what works and what doesn't, sort of, and there's plenty of room for discussion on those. As with most topics on the FFS Talk audio program, they are seeds for more discussion into the future. So I have some ideas for change. What can we do about it? So I've grouped these into 3 sort of subtopics. 1, disclosure. I've posted this previously, that not allowing notes, at least notes, seems wrong. No one should be required to recall with accuracy any fact in any context that might be presented to them. That is, you shouldn't be able to just come up with correct numbers because, right? People can store certain information. They're familiar with certain information. They can recall historical facts, but the accuracy with which that recall can take place over time under this conditions of a high stress, maybe nervous debate interaction is not really realistic. You're testing their ability to perform on stage, not necessarily their understanding. And the recollection could be close, but not quite. Is that a fact-checkable thing? Is there a misunderstanding about some nuance that comes through and mostly correct, but not quite? So asking one person by themselves on a stage to be an expert in all things down to the fact detail level. Now, obviously, as a president, it's like the captain of a ship. If you've ever watched any naval or science fiction, space, Navy presentations, the captain always knows how the ship works. They always know what systems need what and what's damaged and what needs repair and what can we do with what we have still working and all that, because you kind of have to. And that is probably true of a president. But aside from the dramatic presentation, so probably in real life, the captain also has a slew of experts that know exactly how individual systems work and how the systems put together and what can we do with what's damaged, how long to repair and all that. Knowing who to talk to, putting the right people in place is almost as, and maybe even more important than knowing how to do it yourself. So I think the single person on stage pretending that they are an expert in all things at all times under all circumstances is not realistic, and it becomes a kind of a false test. While not having the questions prior seems valid, there is little doubt going into each debate round in primary or general election context that the topics, or what the topics will be. We know what the topics were going to be for the debates for 2024. There's really no question. Well, there were many questions, but there's no doubt. We know what specific elements are going to appear. So the topics were clear, right? It's going to be the border, the economy, personal health rights, right? The ability to take control of your own personal health and well-being. There are a few more, but the big ones, those are the big ones. Those are the ones that are actually consequential. So we know what those are going to be. We know what some of the specific questions or elements of questions will be. So make the questions public. Make them public prior, addressed to both candidates. So I'm not a fan of a moderator or a panelist starting out with, hey, specific candidate, you have said this one thing and you should respond to it. And so essentially, as I mentioned earlier, this is a press conference at that point. It's a press conference where a reporter usually is asking a question, a follow-up question essentially, and then the other candidate, the opposition, gets to chime in, themselves and critique the answer or provide their own answer. I don't know that this is really debate. So I think, my opinion, there should be there's a place, there's a time for that kind of thing. I think if you're going to call it a debate, the debate should be around topics and maybe future looking. If you're going to look at specific incidents, current or past, I think that becomes a different thing. That's debatable, of course. But if you know the questions ahead of time, first of all, there's no accusation of cheating. These are the questions. You could have each candidate answer those questions on their own, right? So you get 2 minutes, you get 2 minutes, and then there's a time in between where they can actually discuss, maybe even argue, like the candidates can interact, like I didn't agree with this and that. And that interaction might actually be more valuable than their actual answers, the way they compose themselves, the way they structure an argument, the way they can bring up details. And by the way, if they have their notes there, they can refer to specific facts. Those notes should be public. Did I say this already? The notes would be made public immediately prior. So each person in the debate has their notes. If you make the notes public to the viewership and to the electorate at large, you post them on the internet. We should make use of the technology. So you post the notes that they're bringing to the debate. They could have a book. All of it should be visible. You could even fact check before the debate, but the fact checking could take place at any time against these notes. So going in, if the candidate wrote down something ridiculous and they refer to that thing ridiculous, you could say, that's wrong. That is just wrong. It's factually wrong. You've published this incorrect fact for the world to see, and you're making use of it in your arguments, and it is incorrect. So with that level of disclosure, you're not really cheating. You're not fact-checking unfairly. You're pointing to something that they brought to the table and saying this is demonstrably false. And the world at large could do this. Right? Well, he or she said this, and they meant that. And they had their data in front of them. They had the information that they brought with them and that they're basing their arguments upon. And if it is simply wrong, that is visible. So some transparency to not only what questions will be asked, because, hey, guess what? If you know the questions ahead of time, and I'm not talking a month ahead of time, maybe a couple days, 24 hours would give the candidates time to make sure their notes have the information that they want to build their arguments around, the information that they want to base their views, their opinions, their strategies. So when they're sitting or standing at the debate itself, they have the question, they already knew what it was. They have an answer that may be rehearsed. If they choose to write out an answer in their notes, that's fine. That's part of, do whatever they're going to do. So if they choose to provide a rehearsed response, and again, the notes would be immediately prior to the debate itself, so there wouldn't be time to, they're going to say this. Let's recraft our notes for that. So you're giving the questions. You're not giving the notes until just before. Literally not. And of course, control of those notes and, you divulge them. the notes would be provided for the sake of this publication like an hour before, right? Not days, not weeks. A digital version, right? You're not going to have people running off photocopies. It's going to be provided digital version of your notes. And after the debate, the notes could be verified, right? Once the debate's over, now you can flip through and see what the notes actually were. Did they match the digital version? Oh, if they didn't match, that's news right there. A deception, right? So all these things would be self-correcting, and they would not be hearsay, finger pointing. It would be, here's the process, here's where they followed it, here's where they did not. In the meantime, you have an actual discussion, actual conversation, actual debate. The moderators should be moderators. And again, we're talking disclosure here as my first subtopic. So the moderator should moderate, allow the candidates to fill in details, backstory, even fact-checking, especially if notes are disclosed. If someone goes off their notes and makes stuff up, the candidate should rebut that attempt. This is where those notes really matter. Disclosure of fact checks prior based on these notes, right? So if people can go through the notes very quickly, assuming they're not bringing a book, but they're digital already, the advent of artificial intelligence being what it is, but essentially fact checking the notes prior will give some insight into where some responses might wander. And these could all be done in public. So you're disclosing the entire process of fact checking based on knowing the questions, knowing what each candidate is bringing to the table, what they are anticipating their answers will be based upon. And the fact checking that takes place across all of this could also be done in public, because you're now not pointing to inferences. You can actually fact check the responses based on the provided notes or background information. It's maybe valuable so that entering the debate setting, the deviations from accuracy are known and public. Not he said, she said, they said, we said, all that. It's here are my presumptions, my points of argument, my facts on which I'm basing my strategy, my policy, and argue factually. Now, politicians hate writing stuff down, so I'm asking a lot. The format, I have some water. The format of the debate. The podium format is interesting, but usually devolves over time. No, I've totally misread what I wrote here. But usually it devolves into overtime statements. Mic cutting to avoid stepping on each other's time, and drama around the split screen dynamic. So the podium is interesting. If you have a primary dozen candidates, they're using podiums. That makes sense. If you're down to the final 2 or 3 and you can fit them at a table, or if they can stand and move around, that may be more effective. By constraining motion and interaction to the podium with a split screen, the dynamic becomes very weird. You're not watching people interacting, you're watching clipped excerpts of people interacting, if that makes sense. So the seated discussion style, like Bush Gore in 2000, debate number 2, perhaps coupled with the pre-disclosed question approach, would enable a thoughtful answer for each candidate, as I described, and then interactive discourse. So rather than interrupting each other, you can write down, okay, let me see what they said here, let me see what you said. There would be a little bit of a buffer because one candidate speaking for 2 minutes, say, the other candidate speaking for 2 minutes gives the first candidate 2 minutes to write down their thoughts. The second candidate would have just finished speaking, and then their interaction would begin. So it's probably want to alternate, try to keep that a little bit fair and balanced, to coin a phrase. But what you essentially would get in a seated table conversational interview is an opportunity. And if we have this back and forth as I've proposed, you end up with real debate over the specifics of a response given in that moment, right? So now, are you thinking on your feet? Do you understand the issue enough to counter what they have just said? Do you have innate knowledge that you can leverage right now in a useful way? You don't have to interrupt each other. You don't have to be vitriolic. You can simply address what the person just said with the facts that you have brought to the table, literally the table. And you can both be in the frame at the same time, with a wide shot, of course. But you can be near each other. You're speaking and interacting like people. You're not in guarded defensive positions behind podiums and so on. Perhaps the interaction would be unmoderated to a point, so that interrupting each other, these tactics, would be at play in this element of overall format. So if you're going to choose to interact in a combative way, and if you're going to interrupt your opponent, if you're going to speak over them, that will show some of your character. Some might perceive that as strong. Some may perceive that as rude. That's part of the charisma game. But it takes performance down a bit. It's still an element, as is all human interaction, but it is not overwhelming the actual policy discussions that would be had, and so on. So, something to think about. The town hall walking format, which we saw more recently in Bush, Clinton, Perot, and then even more recently Bush, Gore, and then somewhere between there, Trump. I'm sorry, not after that, Hillary, Trump, Clinton. So the Bush Gore one I referred to earlier, it was a little bit humorous that when Gore walked up and Bush was kind of looked over and like, oh, hey, or shook his head or said hello or something. It was a low key, appropriate response, and it kind of diffused what could have been like, oh, he's intimidating him. Trump Clinton did have sort of an intimidation factor that was perceived, whether it was intended, probably was. But it enables a bit of stagecraft, interacting with the members of the audience, asking questions, and the rest of the audience, with the opponents as each other essentially are performing in all dimensions at all times. So if you're not answering the question, you're still free to move around. If there are three people on stage, Perot, Bush, Clinton, that's Bill Clinton. So Bush, Bill Clinton, Perot. With three people on the stage, you now have two candidates that can interact while the third is answering a question or speaking and engaging with the audience, moving around the stage themselves. You can check your watch, you can do all manner of silly things, but the way that you can comport yourself, the way you carry yourself on a stage becomes a part of, yes, the performance, but now it's a little bit more human. Like, what do you do when you're not talking? Are you listening? Are you bored? So you're performing in all dimensions. So I think it ups the level, not the level, but it ups the requirement of performance. You almost have to be a little bit more human rather than being more vitriolic or more trying to win the upper hand of zingers. Like, oh, he had that line ready. And if you want a good line that was almost certainly prepared, but you can never be too sure. I mean, it was prepared, of course it was. But the Reagan-Mondale debate, where Reagan's age was an issue, you can find that quote everywhere. It's pretty famous, and it was pretty well delivered by a screen actor, so no surprise there. But that was a good one. And so sometimes you're going to have a pure performance response, but it was an actual topical statement that he made. It was just funny. So I'll leave that to you to check out. There should not be a case in the current election scheme with two major parties and a profoundly disadvantaged third party in just about all cases where more than three candidates are debating. So this applies, of course, to almost all primary debates where the incumbent candidate is not being primaried. So it's usually one of the parties will have a dozen or so, as we've covered briefly, candidates on a stage, sometimes an overflow. So there'll be the first 9 and the second 6 or whatever it is. There are already issues with that overflow round notion that are considered unfair, of course. Politics has become sports-like. There should be a bracket for all to see with absolutely clear messaging that these are elimination rounds. So the whole idea of these early round, 12, 15, 21, 50 potential candidates, they're all candidates in their own right, but they're viable or not. We're not here to pick our favorite 2. We're here to pick which 5 should make it to the next round, or something like this, right? So they're elimination rounds. That should be clear. And so the way that the first rounds of interviews are structured should be very fair, so that there is no impropriety allegation that sticks, because there shouldn't be any impropriety, right? So the way that the elimination rounds take place should be a little bit more rigorous and a little bit more reproducible. What could I mean by that? And then the content. The question answer format as we know it today is dead, or at least nearly so, or should be. with very little value other than performance. As we've covered, if we disclose the questions up front, we have candidates disclose their notes prior, as I've described. The debate is about policy and strategy, and they're face to face for a change rather than on the road, on the rallies where they don't get a response. With the debate between candidates on plans and ideas, not surprises, not zingers, not gotcha questions, not bias, either accused or actual. No threat of hey, you gave them the questions first, and so the playing field truly is level, and it comes down to what your ideas really are, not whether you remember them correctly. For example, audience-generated questions, especially in a town hall format, are valuable if they are not controlled. That is, you haven't loaded the audience and you haven't picked the person with the best question and so on. They always are, by the way. So town halls are not people from the street, person on the street interviews. Those are never person on the street either. You're only seeing the funniest, the best, the most appropriate, the most favorable. Come on. So the selection of audience members to ask questions may be better or more fair if it was completely random. Not necessarily fair to the candidate who wanted to select which questions, but generally speaking, you get a reasonable cross-section of this population, which is already self-selected because they're there, right? Or maybe they're selected in some way, whether they were invited specifically for their role in the community in a particular political affiliation or whatever the case may be. So assuming the audience is not overly biased and the selected audience members, if they accept, would follow the question formation process, which might include crafting a question that if they start with, I would like to know more about border policy, maybe turn that into a usable question that is generic across parties, political parties, whatever the accepted format is. But if you have audience members that would participate in that sort of tuning process without biasing the question, right? So make the question clear and concise and usable, answerable in the space of 2 minutes, not requiring a 20-minute dissertation or a 90-minute one question interview. But if you can craft questions from the general public that are legitimately from the general public and then worded and made to scope or crafted to have a scope that is addressable within the 2 minutes or so, whatever the time limit is. But it's not selected audience members and questions. It's randomly selected audience members and the essence of their question intact, right? So it's just the question of the question is scope and focus, right? Don't skew the question. And in fact, for total transparency, the original question and the actual question, which are usually, the actual question is usually on a card that is read by the audience member. So everybody knows that it's not going to be a Baba Booey question. If you're a Howard Stern fan, you might recall that. So a legitimate question that could be published later with the original question so that any improprieties would be visible. Hey, they were asking about this and you turned it into a question that was decidedly anti one party, one candidate, etc. So yeah, audience generated. There could always be questions taken from social media. There's so often a perception that the audience members are asking questions where the member themselves or the question are planted, and they're probably not far from the truth. Questions from social media might be interesting. That would even be worse because there's no person, there's no human attached to the question. It could be anybody, but it might be an interesting notion as we march into the future. Video questions, probably pre-recorded. Make sure nobody's coming out of the shower or whatever. An expert panel. Consider this. Could subject matter experts, rather than reporters and news personalities, do a better job constructing questions or at least participating in the discussion and debate with more academic and practical knowledge than merely fact checks? Fact checking is controversial. But if you know the topic, if Mark Blythe was sitting at a table with two candidates asking questions about economy and inflation and how tariffs work, Dr. Blythe knows these things. He knows how they work. He can very conversationally interact on any of these topics and misperceptions or misunderstandings of these, and that could be very interesting. Instead, we have reporters and there's no fact checking. So you cannot have an informed and informative conversation. It's really performative, as we've covered. There are actual experts that know quite a bit about economics, immigration, agriculture, global politics, public and individual health, legal processes, and the list goes on and on. There are people who know stuff about stuff. Bonus, if there remains a suitable selection of former presidents, ideally of all parties involved. In this case, this year, if we had a Barack Obama and we had a George W. Bush, for example, that might be interesting if they could ask questions of the candidates. Having a balance of party affiliation would help to not solve, but it would help to solve any impropriety accusations. If you have any presidents around that would like to participate, they could certainly be considered experts in what is often described as the hardest job on the planet. Based on how most of them age in office, that's probably not far from the truth. 2 more sections. I have a crazy idea. Suppose, rather than questions and answers and arguments and whatnot, we took a game show approach. Hang on. There's almost zero chance that this would be accepted by any, but perhaps fringe party candidates, maybe. But what if there was at least one part of an election cycle focused on answering fact questions with fact answers, not diatribes? One answer, maybe in the form of a question. Presidential jeopardy comes to mind. What is presidential jeopardy? This would be a potentially valuable option for primary elimination rounds when the bracket is large. Jeopardy brackets have been done. If the topics and questions are randomized, then a reasonably fair process is at hand. You're not giving the overflow crowd the wimpy questions, right? You're in. Maybe it's 3 at a time. Maybe you do a three. I don't want to say contestant, but 3 potential candidate set of people. They answer questions that have been randomly assigned to something like a game board. The candidates are shown to get answers correct and incorrect. There's a score of some sort. People understand game shows. This is not new. The questions are right there. They didn't get them ahead of time. And even if they did get them ahead of time, that's fine too, right? If we do publish questions ahead of time, then there's no notion where the person was cheated. Like, you know what the questions were going to be. The question really was, did you have the answer at hand? You don't have to go into great detail. We're looking for the answer in the form of a question, if you like. You only have to know, if one of the questions was, tariffs are, what is a national sales tax? What is a tax on the buyer? So these are not intended to be policy description. They're intended to be rapid answer, I know facts, right? I saw recently, I want to say it was Jill Stein, who's a third-party candidate on the left. She was not sure how many, I can't remember if it was Electoral College or members of Congress or something, but if you don't know, the number of congressional representatives in the House, what is 435? Right? If you don't know that number and you're running for political office, especially president, that might be a problem. You should know these things. You don't have to be a constitutional scholar. You just have to have taken civics in 7th or 8th grade and then maybe remember something. You're running for an office to be an executive in an organization that you don't understand. That could be a problem. Potentially valid for elimination rounds. The Jeopardy format in particular may not be a perfect fit in its game show incarnation, but the Jeopardy concept is typically higher caliber with legitimate questions for smart candidates or contestants, while allowing for some minimal fun with the form of a question requirement. So if you did require the form of in the form of a question, would you call it wrong if they didn't? Probably not, but it would be an added element of for the audience. It would be a little bit of fun on top of what should be a very serious subject. A sitting president would most likely balk at a game show format debate once the election cycle reaches that point, but the underlying principles might still be valid. The topic board with dollar amounts and form of a question requirements could go, but the notion that the candidate provides a correct or incorrect answer that is brief and can be verified immediately would have actual value. Fact checking is explicit in the format. You give an answer that is right or wrong. It's not a matter of your opinion. So you could be more leaning into history, a function of how economies work, actual existing laws and policies regarding immigration and agreements with other countries, existing treaties. So it could be very much current context, not as forward-looking, current context and history, so you can understand where we have been. If you're unable to answer some, hey, what country is this? Show an outline of a map. If you don't know some of these things, the American public will let a certain amount slide, but they will also at some point be saying, how come we didn't know it's 435? We all know it's 435. We all know it's 535 total. Nate Silver has convinced everyone of this. It's 535 total. So if you don't know how certain systems work, how certain numbers are related, how certain processes function, you should be able to answer Jeopardy style questions or answers. You should be able to question those answers in a succinct manner that could be paced and informative and actually consumable in its entirety without so much room for interpretation, for commentary, for punditry, for political hacks to get in and declare winners. And you answered 25 questions correctly. You win. But how do you know they're correct? Because we have a panel of experts that compose the questions and answers and everything checks out and you knew your stuff. You're the winner. Yeah, but the other candidate came across better at the... Okay. So somebody may have won on personality or performance. There's nothing bad about that. You can do those things. But this person knew more stuff. I would find that interesting. And a change of pace. But change is hard. I will end... We're at the last section, I promise. I will end the suggesting... I got to fix one little thing here. Yeah, there we go. I will end by suggesting that we as an electorate accept what we are given with a shrug, because what would the body of voters who are to decide the outcome possibly, what could we possibly have to say about this process? I mean, it's supposed to be our process, right? Polling needs to catch up to the modern world, phone polling, text message polling. It's 2024. There's got to be a better way. And something that's a little bit more realistic. Statistical polling can be skewed. You're picking some subpopulation. If we don't understand, but we should, but we are now in the habit of hearing, so they're in the habit of saying that a national poll is essentially meaningless because of the Electoral College, because of different voting districts and different, so everything should be polled according to how Electoral College delegates are going to be assigned and not national polls at random. But if people don't really know this, if they don't understand how this works, then national polls could differ. You might even have a political candidate who doesn't understand that vote counting can be leaning one way and then lean another way as the votes are counted. Dewey, Truman, anybody? So, these are things that should be catching up to modernity. Political parties are not necessarily a great idea. Of course, this is never going to change, not in our lifetime. But they spend a lot of money to make sure that there are a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 2 viable political parties. All of the math behind polling and trends and swing states, and of course the Electoral College itself, not to mention congressional seats in both houses, that's the House of Representatives and the Senate, in case you forgot, are all based on this known configuration. We all know how the crank is turned, and we know what to expect when it comes out, and if it's one way, we do one thing, and so nobody wants to mess with what doesn't work. Like beating the no-win scenario, changing the conditions of the test is coloring outside the lines. So is breaking the two-party system, and nobody wants that. And I put nobody in quotes because the nobody that wants that is the minority. So the people doing the hiring should have more of a say. That's my opinion. Finally, final point, polling and the understanding of the process and the moving parts and the candidates is the responsibility of the voters. That would be us. And it is a responsibility often shirked. The tools exist to be a more informed voter, to take an active interest in the way our country functions or tries to, rather than adopting the views of the team we have always been on for reasons we cannot really justify. I'm a diehard Republican. Why? because I've always been a diehard Republican. Well, what does that actually mean? Because the party policies, the way they behave, everything has changed. Well, I'm the party of Lincoln. No, you're not. Same with the Democrats. It's all political parties evolve over time, but they stick with the branding. It's like Coke and New Coke. If you just called it Coke, but you changed the recipe, there were people that were dumping Coke out their windows. Like, what is this? This is not, yeah, but it's still Coke. Republican, Coke, it's got the red label, everything's the same. No, everything's different. So if people are not aware enough to understand that political party names they're rarely more than labels at this point. So if people can grow to understand and make use of the tools we have, and then our process can adapt to this ability to communicate with people at large, we can talk about ranked choice voting and so on another time. I think I may have talked about that already, actually. So yeah, but the change is hard. We're not going to see any sort of evolution in the way that we vote and the way parties are organized, the way a coalition government could be formed. I'm not suggesting anything radical, but why can't there be ranked choice voting in 3 or 4 different parties, or at least more than 2 candidates, right? There could be 3 Democrats running for president, and ranked choice voting, you pick your top 3 or top 4 or whatever the number of candidates is, the number that would be correct for ranked choice voting. Maybe you rank them all, right? So there are pros and cons to different structures of voting with multiple choices, ranked choice or something similar, right? Runoffs are very expensive, so you can build the runoff notion right in at the beginning. So yeah, that's it. I'm done. My voice is barely hanging on as usual. I had tea beforehand. I'll figure this out eventually. What will work in the particulate environment that is breathing in Vegas. That's where we're going to leave it. Don't forget to check out buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo and Ko-fi.com/DanHugo for links and other such things about my media production projects and other stuff that I'm working on. In the meantime, don't forget to vote this year and every year. Vote early, vote often. Get out there, and every consequential election happens to be the one happening right now. No, like next 4 years from now, 2 years from now, midterm elections, these will be the most important elections in your life. The most existential, every year, every 2 years has to be an existential risk. Certainly every 4 has to be placing the entire planet at risk, possibly even Mars. There you go. Thank you so much for listening as always. And don't forget, guests could be welcome. Think about it. Bye-bye.